welcome to Dustin's Kaleidoscope. I am Dustin, and today I am here with Alan Delozier, and he is an archivist and also a librarian at Seton Hall.
Yes. Nice to meet you, Dustin.
Thank you so much for being on here.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was that you know about genealogy, and as an archivist, I assume that you probably have some interest in that, personal interest as well as a professional interest. And I thought it would be great for you to come on and help people understand what genealogy is, the importance of it, and also some of the preliminary steps that people can take if they're interested in trying to find out more about their family history. So again, thank you for being here.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
So how did you get started? What is your background? How did you become interested in genealogy?
Okay. Well, essentially, when I was a young lad, way back when, essentially I was always interested in history as a subject area. But I have a really close family. I have a lot of wonderful friends, and just learning about all the different stories out there. Everybody has a story, and this is the beautiful thing about genealogy. People sharing their shared experience with others, and just learning and perpetuating the human society, as it were, in terms of the different types of things that are going on. Pretty weighty answer, but with genealogy, it's the study of the history of family, the study of generations, and so forth. So that's how I sort of got interested in it, and from there on, I just made a career out of it, which is a nice benefit.
So you said you were initially interested in history. How did you make the jump from just general history to your family history, or were the two always intertwined?
Okay. Well, essentially, when I was in school, I learned more about American history for the most part, and then I sort of one day came upon like, oh, I came from somewhere. So talking to my parents, my brother, and my sister, essentially I learned more about how they became who they were. Different career paths, different ways what things they studied in school as well. So from there, it made me interested in terms of what they were, how they came about their interest, and how it impacted on my own interest, not only from a schoolwork viewpoint, but also from a personal viewpoint. So it also developed in terms of what I was going to study, and it just evolved over the years.
And when you you became interested in history as a young child. When did you become more serious about learning about your family history?
Okay, I'll fast forward to the college years.
Oh, okay.
Essentially, I learned more about how to study various primary sources, vital records, and various things that would help tell the story in more detail. Essentially, I look at it as a layered practice genealogy. You try to start from the basics. Who are your parents? Who are your grandparents? And then from there, you try to learn more about, okay, where were they born? When were they born? Where are they from? And so forth. So in the college years, this was also a great thing because I had a class assignment, which helped.
Oh,
so
that's
sort of
wonderful.
like double duty.
Right.
In terms of building sources. And from there, it just became an interest that has carried over to the present day.
And so when you mentioned that your family was also, you were interested in finding out how the different impacts of your family on yourself and things like that. Did you start with your family? Like, was there oral history, or did you just dive in and say, okay, these are my parents, these are my siblings, or did you actually ask for more information from your parents?
Okay. Yeah, what I did is what most genealogists do. They start with a pedigree or a chart in terms of doing a sort of like a tree, a family tree,
Okay.
as it were, in terms of the names and the date ranges, in terms of when they lived and so forth. Fortunately, my parents are still alive, which is good. And what I did from there is, when I learned more from them, it's always good to start with your immediate family and work out. So what I did is I interviewed my father and my mother in more detail, my aunt and uncles, and my brother and sister. And they had some things. It was more present day knowledge, but backtracking a little bit. But with that, they also put great perspective in terms of the story of the family and so forth.
Okay.
And I should point out not only the family, but also various neighbors and so forth. So it's always good to have context too, along with who'd you grow up with, and who are some of the people you interact with, and so forth. Genealogy is a very broad science in many ways, but it's a really beautiful and happy science too, because you learn so much about, people this way.
And that's interesting because I hadn't thought of the context of putting it in context of the neighborhood that you grew up in, the neighbors that you had, and things like that. If you were to suggest a specific way for people who are interested in genealogy to start, and you mentioned obviously, if you have parents who are living, you can start with that. How would you, if you do not, what would be the next step?
Okay. If you don't have parents who are living, maybe try to find any relatives that you might have. And if you don't have any relatives or immediate relatives who are living, this is where the library comes in at some point. But this is something, if you know at least the name and have basic information, in many ways it's interesting. The more information you know, the better. But even if you have scraps of information, it's a good starting point. At least the name of your parents or so forth, you can go on that. John Smith and Jane Smith are tough, but you can try and work around it. And you can always start with like the place that you're living in and maybe where you were born and so forth. So anything in the collected memory and just that you could find out is imperative. I'm speaking pretty much in broad strokes,
Right.
But you always go down from the research pyramid from broad to specific.
Okay, and so if people have these little bits of information, what do they? So they would make a preliminary tree, and what would they? So they have these, big parts of the branches missing.
Right.
What would you said the library is a good resource? What specifically would one? What resource would you use in the library, or would you use the librarian as a resource, or both of these things?
Absolutely, librarians are awesome. So.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll go. I'm a
definitely
bit
agree.
biased, but hey. But actually, it's good. You start methodically.
Okay.
Essentially, I mentioned vital records because basically birth certificates.
Okay.
Anything dealing with the birth of. I'm starting with like the first person.
Right.
Okay, and then if you get married, marriage record, if that works out. And then the death record. These are the big three of the vital record tree.
Okay.
Because it shows the lifespan of the individual in paper form. It's a paper trail. And these are vital records that are usually held with the state that you're from, state of New Jersey in this case, or any other place that you may have lived. Records that deal with count, they could be in the county, they could be in some other places, but they are housed with the government. And librarians can help individuals track these records in various ways. That's where the scraps of information come into play. In terms of
Okay.
how much you know, they can always help, or you can do it independently and try to track down the records that way. Now with the vital records, then you branch out to other records. If you can find obituaries, a great source of information in a local newspaper or what have you, because it usually gives the vital stats right there in terms of birth range, death range, and also some of the things, maybe profession, maybe places lived, and other relatives' names and so forth.
Oh, okay. So then you can start expanding the tree if you have other relatives' names, or even the city or the town. The geographic location.
Yes.
Maybe you could find other people there. So, would the obituary, the vital records, are these things available online, or would you actually have to go to that particular part of the government in order to find those pieces of information?
Usually through the government, because a lot of times they're confidential. And things that are more public in terms of the internet would be census records, which just give basically names, living, places lived and so forth, basic information. So it's one of those things where you might have to go through a few channels to find the information you need, especially in terms of the vital parts. But there are other public records that can maybe help as well. Obituaries are usually in the public domain.
Okay.
So,
and those are sometimes online, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I'll work with you and the audience in terms of like resources and where to find various things, because it's an endless trail. but it's a good trail.
I've done research on my family, and it is definitely, you can go in many different directions. Are there any tips that you would give people as far as how to conduct how to perform genealogy, because you could go in lots of different directions. Do you recommend that? Do you recommend a more focused approach or a combination of the two?
Okay, I'd say both, and I'll tell you why. Well, basically, first you have to have a passion for what you're doing, and many of the people who do family history, if you just ask them about their family, they light up. It's amazing. Their eyes become bright, and then they start launching into stories about what they found. So it's very heartwarming in a way. With that said, having the passion means you can go and explore different sources. And these individuals really get tired of looking into different things. But with that said, a methodical approach is usually the best way to start and then sustain.
Okay.
Starting small and then from the vital records, but then going into different directions, maybe ones you didn't think about. And I'll just add a few examples. Essentially, things like voting records. How did your family vote in terms of Republican, Democrat, Independent?
Okay.
In terms of school records. Here at Columbia, you have a wonderful archive here at the school. Yearbooks. High school yearbooks are great in terms of write-ups, maybe activities somebody were involved with, and so forth. School newspapers, different details. Maybe somebody wrote for the school newspaper and so forth. So alumni records. But then you also have other types of records, such as, I have a laundry list here, actually.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah, that would be great, yes.
How long is your show? I'm sorry.
We like information. Information is great.
Good. But just to go down, religious records, essentially, christening records, depends on what religious denomination you're involved with. Court records, if there was any type of information there. Immigration, naturalization records, and so forth. Land and property deeds, different wills and things like that as well.
Okay.
These are just a few of the many things that you can be involved with in terms of structuring your search and going into different directions.
And so a lot of these things I don't know. Are some of these things available online and some available through the government, and you'd have to go to different areas? How would you recommend people go about that? Because you could find something online and then that leads you to something offline, and so I wouldn't want people to get frustrated and say, well, this is too much going back and forth.
Absolutely, and I'm with you too. I'll cut to the chase. Essentially, there's if you go to general sites through a search engine like Google or Hotbot or what have you, maybe doing searches for genealogy sites, which would be federal government and so forth. There are sites that outline different resources for the family historian.
Oh, okay.
And so forth. Actually, if you type in search engine, just a tip for people out there, maybe genealogy in quotation marks. It means genealogy has to be somewhere within the body of the search, or family history.
Okay.
Or if they want to go right to their family name, this is the secondary.
Okay.
They can always try that as well. But there are a lot of great sites out there that can start the novice and the professional alike in terms of different directions. I wish I could say everything is on the net. That's the dream. It's not quite there yet, but you're right. Different types of records, different types of representation on the World Wide Web.
And it would be pretty easy to find a lot of this information online for free, or is it a combination of both paid and free services?
Okay, combination. A lot of free sites, and I'll just tell you a few examples. There's NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration.
Yes.
NARA.org. There's also Library of Congress, LOC.gov.
Okay.
Which is good for more national type of resources and so forth. And then there's the state resources through New Jersey, the state of New Jersey and so forth. I don't have the URL right offhand, but you can always go through there, and that's where the vital records and other types of resources are. But also there are subscription ones. Probably the most famous one is Ancestry.com, which is one that has a lot of detail to it and so forth. These are more involved, and there is a premium per month that you pay. But it's a great site from those who I've talked to and have utilized it on a regular basis, testify to.
Perfect. Well, we're going to come back in a couple of minutes. This is Dustin's Kaleidoscope, and we'll be back in a few moments.
Local government, local educational institutions, and local community members all use cable access TV to communicate their message. They depend upon it as an affordable means of outreach. Public educational and government access television empowers local government agencies, individuals, and groups to use the media to speak directly to their constituents in a more direct and cost-effective way. Make sure everyone has a voice. Support your local PEG channels.
Welcome back to Dustin's Kaleidoscope. I'm Dustin, and I'm here with Alan. And Alan is basically telling us a lot about genealogy, how to get started, some of the resources, and a lot of good information. So thank you again for being here. And I know at the end of the last segment, you were telling us a little bit about some of the resources that were available. I know you mentioned Ancestry and some other ones that were just basically at the library and some that were paid. I wanted to switch the conversation a bit because off camera we were talking a little bit about some of the people and some of the books that have basically, for lack of a better word, propelled genealogy into the limelight. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about who you think, some of the books and the people who have helped.
Sure. I'll go back thousands of years, but
Okay.
we'll come up to the present. Actually, Confucius was like one of the first major genealogist. I think his was the largest family tree going. So even back to the wisdom of Confucius, up through the Mormons, the Church of the Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City, Utah, and around that area. They were very important in terms of like documenting the human experience. It didn't matter what religious discipline, what background. They believed in terms of baptismal after death. So one of their things was recording each human story, which was.
Oh, okay.
So that's why Ancestry and the Mormon Church were very important in terms of documenting from different perspectives. And then we come up to the present day, the 1970s. Alex Haley, the wonderful author who wrote the book Roots, which was a major bestseller, but also in terms of a miniseries, two miniseries actually, the first and then Roots: The Next Generation. Very important in terms of getting people into family history genealogy study. So here we are in the present day, and we have various other shows, books, galore on this particular subject, and we're talking about it here today.
Right. And so so that Roots came out about in the mid-70s or so, and is there an actual, can you actually tell that a lot of people just became very interested in their genealogy, like from that point on? Has it just become more and more popular, or have you seen that as a librarian, like when people come in, or?
Absolutely. I give away my age, but I wasn't a librarian in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
I was thinking. No, but with that said, we have a lot of books with copyrights that are latter 1970s, 80s, and 90s. So the number of volumes have gone up over the years in terms of how to do studies, dictionaries, thesauruses, different study aids. Not only the online versions, which are more in the present day, but the book trail. Very important to keep that in mind, too.
Okay.
Because if they're not ebooks or electronic books at this point, a lot of times they can go back the old school method, as it were, in terms of studying leads for family history research.
Okay. And so, and what has also become very popular today, we have a lot of TV shows. We have Henry Louis Gates.
Yes.
The name of the TV series escapes me, but
I don't know why, but he's amazing in terms of doing like the ancestral part of it from a physical and like I think it's
DNA,
more DNA,
yes.
Exactly, a scientific viewpoint.
And is that something that you would recommend? Is that another tier? Like you would just start, like as far as starting your family tree, would you just, at what point do you feel like, okay, you should probably investigate DNA?
I think DNA is exciting because this way you can really get a sense of the physiological to go along with the philosophical in a way, if that
Right.
makes sense. I think it's like the next frontier in many ways, and it's becoming more and more popular. And I would recommend it because I hear a lot of great stories about how people are descended from like these really interesting individuals in the course of history and from geographical places you may not have even thought about. So it's something.
That's true. Because you may assume.
exactly. So Dr. Gates and everyone who's doing that kind of research, along with traditional methods, especially on television, which makes it more pronounced and more out there in terms of awareness. It's a great resource.
Okay. And thinking of resources, I noticed that you brought a few books. Were there some things that you wanted to bring to our attention about
Sure,
them?
why not? I was going to bring a computer monitor to show you the internet, but that might be a little
Oh, no,
little tricky.
that would have been great, too. Yeah.
You're very kind. Okay. Well, I just brought just a few, just as an example. Now, in terms of books, we were talking off camera a little bit about military history.
Yes.
I don't have a book on that per se, but just as a placeholder or representation. Essentially, books on, say, the American Civil War.
Okay.
Things like registers, regimental information, and so forth. And the dictionaries I mentioned a few moments ago. Things like that in terms of items like that are very important. This one happens to be a dictionary of Irish family names. So it's something that, if you want to check it out. This is something that is contextual. This is something that's something I'm really, I tend to preach about from a family history viewpoint. Not only the immediate family, but I mentioned neighbors, geography, and other types of factors that go into the whole story of the individual.
And the names of...
Yeah, and for example, being March, Irish Heritage and Cultural Month, and we deal with Irish records too. So
Yes.
essentially, knowing the clan names back to Ayr, which is Irish for Ireland, essentially knowing that can give somebody a perspective about the old country per se, and where they may have immigrated from a geographical standpoint. So that's just one example. I'm rambling here, but
No, but
suffice to
this
say-
is great because I think a lot of people would not think to do this, to go back to the family name. Now, how about people who immigrated here and they may have had a longer name, but when they went through Ellis Island or for some other reason, they changed their names? What would they do as far as trying to find out about the family name and things like that?
Great. I'm glad you brought that up because that's a very excellent point. Because sometimes the family names have been shortened or Americanized, as it
Right.
were. These are all air quotes. And so forth. So essentially, going through, say, Ellis Island, say an Italian or a Polish family which didn't speak English per se, maybe broken at that, came through the line and talking to the individuals who processed, they may not have had like the command of the language. So what one person heard may have been spelled differently or abbreviated, and there's all these variations that may have happened over time. And sometimes it's very difficult to trace because sometimes you don't know your heritage or your ethnicity.
Right.
Going by, say, well, we'll go back to Smith. It could have been Smith Ellie or Smith Oski or something like that, just as an example. So it could have been shortened or modified in some way. So it's a very good point in terms of just trying to find the answer, like where it's at. So that's why sometimes genealogy is a matter of just trying to find, close family name or information that would, lead a person into the right direction.
Okay.
General direction, and then hopefully specifics.
And along the same line, so African Americans who came here, they obviously did not have the same names, and
Right.
Many times there are two things. They may have, when they were slaves, they had the last name of the slaveholder, but then once emancipated, they changed the names because they didn't want that name. So what do you do? Because I know that there are many African Americans who get back to the point where they're right at slavery and they don't know which way to go. What would you suggest?
I know that's a difficult one, but it's rewarding because this is something to be celebrated in terms of the background. Now, in terms of finding information of this sort, it's kind of difficult in terms of again, it's the family name, but then you go back to primary source documents,
Okay.
ship logs, things like this in terms of transactions and so forth. So it's one of those things that it's not a pretty part of history, but something that is vital to keep, in terms of the experience and the legacy and the celebration alive. With that said, it's just trying to find the right documentation and line back to find it. So I'm speaking in generalities again, but suffice to say, it's trying to do the research, especially from a geography standpoint,
Okay.
from maybe the South, for example, back to maybe Africa or some other continent or so forth. So it's one of those, okay, how far can we trace back
Right.
and what sources to go from?
And where would you find like the ships? Where would you find that information? So would you? I know part of genealogy is making educated guesses, but how do you even, like, once you get back, like, say for example your relatives are from Virginia, Virginia's. I mean, where would you just look along the coast, or where would you even find these ship records?
Okay, I'll go a little bit full circle again. This is where broader study is like, okay, say basically you have a farmer who's like from Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And you say, okay, what kind of farmer were they? Maybe they harvested peanuts, maybe they dealt with tobacco, what have you. That way you study the place and maybe, where the areas were that they were cultivating these particular crops.
Okay.
And then from there you can maybe narrow it down a little bit more in terms of, okay, looking for records, maybe say they were selling in a local town, or maybe they were doing some other types of commerce or something.
Okay.
So this is something to study in terms of a broader context, and then
Okay.
try to get closer
Narrow
and
it
closer. Local libraries, along with the,
Oh, okay.
is something that, I know
We
Virginia's
all
a
go
big
back to
state.
the library,
I'm sorry, it's my mindset. And actually, again, I'm speaking broadly, but essentially you have to be a detective to
Okay.
come together. Patience, along with passion,
Yes.
comes into play.
Yes.
It really does, because sometimes, you just follow these leads, and hopefully they pan out in the proper way.
Okay.
And then from there, it's like the family tree. The research tree itself is like you branch out, and then you go more specific as you go along.
Okay. I noticed you also brought up a few other books. I wanted to
Okay.
get to those before we ran out of time.
Okay, well, the Researcher's Guide to
Wow, I
Wow.
did not even know that existed.
it looks like a Bible in terms of, and I'm
Wow.
speaking of Bibles. Bibles are good in terms of family history.
Uh-huh.
But this is one for researchers. Things like this can help individuals get a start. So Val Greenwood is a respected name in the field, and
Okay.
things like that can help. And not only American genealogy, but genealogy from all viewpoints, Canadian, Mexican, what have you. It's all important.
And so this is something that an amateur genealogist can pick up and sort of get an idea of what genealogy is overall and the way to go about conducting genealogy?
Exactly.
Oh, perfect. We have about a minute left. So what is the last book?
Real quick, it's a college yearbook, but any type
Oh,
of
okay.
school level from Seton Hall. But Colum itself does have yearbooks too, and great ones. So essentially, they tell the story about an individual, activities,
Oh, they have a lot of information.
write-ups.
Oh.
And from the 20s and 30s and 40s, they usually have nice write-ups, and they're all nice about the individuals. So it gives context, story to the individual life, and so forth.
Okay. This is great. You have given us so much great information today. We have about 40 seconds left. What are some, is there anything that you haven't told us that you think we should know?
Okay, in 40 seconds, let's see. I say, follow your path in terms of family history. It's invaluable. It's something that not only makes yourself rewarded, it helps future generations to learn more about you, your family, and, society at large. So, it's a really great field. I'm biased, but at the same time, I think it's a wonderful endeavor, so.
Alan, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful show. I really appreciate all the information. I think all of the viewers are really going to appreciate it as well, because it'll give them a nice introduction to what genealogy is and, of course, the importance. And I'm Dustin. This is Dustin's Kaleidoscope, and we will see you next time.